The wind moved low across the plains that night, carrying dust, old memories, and the kind of silence that made a man listen to his own heartbeat. That was how the cowboy first noticed her, a widow standing alone near the edge of town, wrapped in black not just by cloth but by grief. People said she barely spoke since her husband was buried, that her house stayed dark even when the moon was bright. Yet when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, sharp and heavy, like a rope pulled too tight. He was a lone cowboy, worn by the road and shaped by loss of his own. He had ridden through many towns, slept under many skies, but something about her stopped him cold. Maybe it was the way she held herself together when everything else had fallen apart, or the quiet strength behind her tired eyes. As he stepped closer, he felt his breath shorten, not from desire alone, but from the weight of what he sensed beneath her silence. "You never told me you were this tight," he whispered, not as a crude remark, but as a startled truth about how guarded her heart was, how fiercely she held her pain inside. The widow did not pull away. Instead, she looked at him as if he had spoken the one thing no one else dared to notice. Her life had narrowed since her husband's death, closing in like a fist around her chest. Trust had become a rare thing, hope even rarer. In this rough corner of the American West, a woman alone learned quickly how dangerous it was to open up, and a cowboy passing through learned just as fast that some stories were heavier than saddlebags filled with gold. Their meeting was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, tense, and full of things left unsaid. The town watched them from a distance, whispering their own versions of the truth. Some said the cowboy would break her heart and ride away by morning. Others said the widow had secrets that could ruin a man. Neither of them knew which rumor was closer to the truth, but both felt the pull of something they could not easily escape. As the night deepened, the air between them grew thicker. Every step closer felt risky. Every word mattered. The cowboy sensed that behind her calm face was a story shaped by betrayal, loss, and survival. The widow saw in him not just a stranger, but a man who might understand what it meant to keep breathing when life had already taken so much. Yet fear stood between them like a loaded gun on a table. Just when it seemed one of them might finally speak the truth, footsteps echoed nearby, and the moment shattered. Someone was watching. Someone who knew more than they should. The widow's eyes darkened, and the cowboy felt his chest tighten again, this time with danger instead of wonder. Whatever was about to be revealed would change everything, and neither of them was ready for what waited in the shadows. The widow turned slightly, her hand tightening around the shawl at her shoulders. The footsteps faded, but the feeling of being watched did not. In this small frontier town, secrets traveled faster than horses, and hers were buried deep. She had learned to live quietly after her husband's death, keeping her doors closed and her past closer. The cowboy noticed how her gaze kept drifting toward the dark street, as if she expected trouble to step out at any moment. He wanted to ask her what she feared, but years on the trail had taught him that some truths came only when they were ready. Instead, he listened. He listened to the wind, to the distant creak of signs, and to the way her breathing changed when silence stretched too long. He sensed that her grief was not simple, that it carried weight beyond loss. There were rumors about her late husband, whispered late at night in saloons, stories of bad deals and unpaid debts. None of it had ever been proven, but rumors had a way of clinging to those left behind. The widow finally spoke, her voice low and steady. She told him how life had shrunk after the funeral, how every knock on the door made her heart race. Men had come asking questions, some pretending to be kind, others not bothering to hide their threats. She never knew who to trust. Even now, standing beside this lone cowboy, she felt torn between wanting to lean closer and wanting to run back inside and lock every bolt. The cowboy shared less, but what he did say mattered. He spoke of moving town to town, never staying long enough for roots to grow. He hinted at a past he didn't like to remember, a mistake that still followed him like a shadow. That was why he noticed shadows so easily. That was why the footsteps from moments earlier unsettled him. This wasn't just a chance meeting. Something had pulled them together, and something else was circling them both. As the moon climbed higher, tension hung thick between them. The town felt too quiet, as if holding its breath. Somewhere nearby, a door creaked, then slammed shut. The widow flinched. The cowboy shifted his stance, instinctively placing himself closer, not touching her, but ready. Whatever secrets lay in her past, they were catching up fast. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood the risk. Trust could bring comfort, or it could bring ruin. And as another distant sound echoed through the night, the widow realized that by letting this stranger stand beside her, she might already have crossed a line she could never step back from. By morning, the town seemed different, as if it had learned something during the night and was waiting to see what would happen next. The widow noticed it first: the way the shopkeeper paused too long before greeting her, the way two men stopped talking when she passed. Grief had made her invisible once, but now she felt exposed. Whatever her late husband had been involved in was no longer buried with him, and she feared someone believed she knew more than she did. The cowboy sensed it too. Trouble had a smell, and this town carried it. He overheard whispers at the stable about missing money and a deal gone wrong years ago. Her husband's name still stirred unease, even after death. Some thought the widow held on to something valuable. Others believed she was the key to settling an old score. The cowboy began to wonder if his arrival had been noticed for the wrong reasons. If someone assumed he was part of her past instead of a stranger passing through. From another angle, a man watched from the porch of the saloon, eyes sharp and patient. He had been waiting for movement, for weakness. Seeing the widow with the cowboy unsettled him. A lone woman was easier to pressure than one with a man willing to stand his ground. He didn't know who the cowboy was, but he planned to find out. In a town like this, loyalty was rare, and fear was currency. The widow struggled with her own conflict. Part of her wanted to tell the cowboy everything, to lay out the truth about her husband's final weeks and the fear that followed. Another part warned her that trusting him could put him in danger too. She had already lost one man to secrets. She wasn't sure she could live with losing another. As dusk approached again, the cowboy faced a choice of his own. He could saddle up and ride out, leaving the mystery behind, or he could stay, knowing full well that staying meant stepping into a story soaked in risk. When he looked at the widow, standing alone against the fading light, he knew the road ahead would not be easy, and that whatever was coming was closer than neither of them wanted to believe. Night returned heavier than before, pressing down on the town like a warning. Lanterns flickered along the main street, throwing long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The widow felt it in her chest, a tightness that told her something was about to break loose. She had locked her doors early, yet sleep would not come. Every sound made her sit up, listening, counting breaths, remembering all the nights she had done the same after her husband died. Across the street, the cowboy stood near the stable, pretending to tend to his horse while watching everything at once. He noticed unfamiliar riders tied near the saloon, their gear worn but well kept, the kind used by men who didn't scare easily. He heard raised voices inside, her husband's name spoken again, sharper this time. Whatever they wanted had a deadline, and that deadline felt close. From the shadows behind the widow's house, a figure lingered. He studied the windows, the back door, the path leading toward the creek. He wasn't alone. Another man waited farther off, nervous, shifting his weight. Plans were being made without words, driven by greed and unfinished business. The widow had become more than a grieving woman. She was leverage. When a sudden knock hit her door, her heart nearly stopped. She didn't answer. The knock came again, firmer. Then a familiar voice called her name. Relief and fear tangled together as she recognized the cowboy. She opened the door just enough to see his tense face. He told her she wasn't safe, that men were asking questions they shouldn't know how to ask. Before she could respond, a shout echoed down the street, followed by the sound of boots running. Horses snorted, restless. The cowboy turned sharply, hand hovering near his side, eyes scanning the dark. The widow stepped back, realizing the past she had tried so hard to survive was no longer behind her. It was here, closing in fast, and whatever choice they made next would change everything. The shout grew closer, splitting the night in two. The widow stepped back as the cowboy pulled the door shut behind him, his movements quick but careful. He told her in a low voice that this was no longer about rumors or old debts. Someone had found proof, something tied to her late husband that was supposed to stay hidden forever, and now they believed she knew where it was. Her face drained of color. She admitted then that weeks before her husband died, he had come home shaken, carrying a small locked ledger wrapped in oilcloth. He never said what was inside, only that it could get people killed. After his death, she had hidden it beneath the floorboards, too afraid to destroy it, too afraid to hand it over. The cowboy realized the danger instantly. A ledger meant names, money, and crimes that powerful men would kill to erase. Outside, boots scraped against wood, a lantern flared to life, its glow sliding across the window like a searching eye. The cowboy peered through a crack in the wall and stiffened. One of the men wasn't a stranger from the saloon. He was a lawman from a neighboring county, a man with a clean badge and a reputation for fairness. Or so the stories said. Seeing him there twisted everything. If the law was involved, there would be no easy way out. From another corner of town, the saloon watcher received word that the ledger was real. His patience vanished. He ordered his men to move faster, to stop pretending this was a quiet negotiation. The town that once felt small and sleepy now felt like a trap. Every road watched, every shadow occupied. The widow realized the cowboy staying might put him directly in the line of fire, and guilt weighed heavy on her chest. As they listened to voices arguing outside, the cowboy made a choice without announcing it. He pried up a loose floorboard and saw the oilcloth bundle for the first time. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't just paper. It was leverage, danger, and maybe the only thing keeping them alive. A sudden crash echoed from the back of the house as someone tried the rear door. The widow gasped, grabbing the cowboy's arm. The lantern light grew brighter, closer, with enemies closing in from both sides and the truth finally exposed. The cowboy knew there would be no riding away at dawn. The night was about to decide who would survive, and who would be buried alongside the secrets of this broken town. The back door gave way with a sharp crack, and the moment shattered into chaos. The cowboy moved fast, pulling the widow behind him as voices filled the house. Lantern lights spilled across the walls, and boots thundered inside. Before anyone could grab them, the lawman stepped forward, raising his hand. He called for calm, his voice steady, commanding. For a breath, the room froze. The cowboy held the ledger up where everyone could see it. He spoke clearly, naming the fear that had ruled the town for years. The book held proof of stolen money, bribes, and the chain of crimes that tied the saloon men to ranchers and officials across counties. The widow added her voice, shaking but strong, telling how her husband had tried to leave the mess behind, how he had been threatened, and how the ledger had become his death sentence. Murmurs spread. Some men looked away, others tightened their grips. The lawman's face changed, the clean badge dulled in the lantern glow. He admitted the truth at last. He had been part of it, not the worst, but enough to be guilty. He had come hoping to seize the ledger quietly and bury the past. When the cowboy refused, the saloon watcher lunged, and everything broke loose. In the struggle that followed, the ledger tore free, pages scattering like startled birds. Names and numbers flashed in the light, impossible to deny. Neighbors poured in as the noise drew them close. Someone shouted for the sheriff from the next town. The balance tipped. The saloon men backed down. The lawman dropped his badge, defeated by the weight of what everyone had seen. By dawn, the worst of it was over. Arrests followed. The town exhaled. The widow stood in the quiet that came after, feeling lighter than she had in years. The truth had cost her safety, but it gave her something back too. The cowboy prepared to leave, believing his work finished. She thanked him, meaning more than words could hold. As he rode out, a boy ran after him with a folded page found under the floorboards. It wasn't a name or a number. It was a note in her husband's hand, warning that the ledger was only a copy. The original had been sent away long ago, to someone who would know when to use it. The cowboy looked back at the town, realizing the story wasn't done. Some truths don't end, they wait. The cowboy folded the note and tucked it into his coat, feeling the weight of it settle in his chest. He rode on for a mile before stopping, letting the morning sun warm his back. The warning explained why the widow's husband had seemed calmer near the end, as if he had already set something in motion. The copy under the floorboards had been bait, meant to surface when the town could no longer ignore the truth. The original, wherever it rested, was insurance. With arrests underway and eyes finally open, its purpose had been served without ever being shown. Back in town, the widow stood on her porch and watched the dust fade from the road. Fear still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. The sheriff from the next town followed through, and the names whispered for years were spoken out loud. Accounts were settled, properties seized, and the saloon shuttered. Men who once thrived on silence learned how loud honesty could be. The widow answered questions when she could and said nothing when she didn't need to. For the first time since her husband's death, she slept through the night. She found the strength to open her house again, to let light in. Neighbors brought food, then conversation. Some apologized, others simply stayed quiet, which was enough. The widow kept the ledgers to worn pages, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that truth matters even when it costs. She planted a small garden behind the house, choosing roots and seeds that could survive hard ground. It felt right. The cowboy didn't try far. He took work along the river, mending fences and earning honest pay. He sent word through the sheriff that the note was safe and would remain so. He didn't want leverage anymore. He wanted peace. On clear evenings, he thought of the widow and hoped the town would treat her better than it had before. He hoped she would learn to trust again, in her own time. Months later, the town settled into a quieter rhythm. Stories spread, as they always do, but this one carried a lesson. Secrets rot communities. Courage heals them. A widow learned that her voice mattered. A cowboy learned that staying can be braver than leaving. And a town learned that the past doesn't own the future unless people let it. When the wind crossed the plains again, it sounded different. Less like a warning and more like a promise. Some truths wait, but when they arrive, they leave room for something better to grow.